My son-in-law thought the worst thing that could happen on his wedding day was the caterer messing up the cake. He was wrong. The worst thing was that he had spent the last 6 months insulting the one man who could end his career with a single nod. That man was me, his new father-in-law. This is a story about how arrogance can write checks that reality can't cash. If you believe respect is earned, not bought, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the fallout. There are moments in life that act as a compass, pointing directly to a person's true north. They're rarely the loud, dramatic declarations. More often, they're quiet. A dismissive glance, a condescending turn of phrase, a choice made when they think no one of consequence is watching. My moment of clarity about my future son-in-law. Derek arrived on a crisp October evening in Chicago, served alongside a bowl of French onion soup. The restaurant was the Lakeview Grill, a place that felt like a warm embrace against the autumn chill. It was all dark wood paneling and deep leather booths, the kind of establishment that valued comfort over trends. The low, pleasant hum of other people's lives, clinking glasses, murmured conversations. A distant laugh formed a soothing backdrop. I'd brought my daughter, Laura, here for years. Sitting across from her now, watching the candlelight dance in her eyes as she talked animatedly about floral arrangements. I felt a profound sense of peace. Her joy was a palpable thing, a warmth that radiated across the small table. I thought to myself, this is the dividend on a life's work. Not the stock price or the market share, but this simple, unassailable happiness in my daughter's face. I was in a favorite gray cashmere sweater, soft and unassuming, feeling utterly content. The bubble of tranquility popped the moment Derek arrived. He wasn't just late, he made an entrance. He strode in as if he owned the place. His suit, a shade of navy blue, so sharp and shiny, it seemed to repel the restaurant's soft lighting. He offered me a handshake that felt more like a brief collision of palms. His grip loose and his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. Then he slid into the booth beside Laura, planting a loud kiss on her cheek. Sorry, honey. You would not believe the day. We're crushing it. Absolutely crushing it. He loosened a tie that was cinched just a little too tight and finally settled his gaze on me. Another record quarter on the books. Michael, the old guard at the office, is getting left in the dust. It's a whole new game now. I just offered a small, neutral smile. Laura, my ever-perceptive daughter, shifted in her seat. A tiny adjustment that I knew was her attempt to soften his abrasive energy. We were just looking at the menu. Babe, I'm starving. A young, polite waiter materialized. Laura and Derek ordered elaborate cocktails with names I didn't recognize. I asked for a sparkling water with a slice of lime. When the waiter returned, Derek held his glass up to the light, inspecting it, before taking a theatrical sip. For our food order, I stuck with my usual, just the French onion soup to start. Please. Derek, who had been studying the menu like a legal document, looked up. A slow, condescending curl of the lip transformed his smile into a smirk. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible change, but it was aimed directly at me. After the waiter departed, he leaned forward, steepling his fingers, keeping it simple. His voice was smooth, draped in a thin veil of feigned approval. Smart move. Very strategic when you're on a fixed income. Laura's hand, which had been resting on his arm, twitched. Derek, Dad loves the soup here. We've been coming since I was a kid. Oh, I get it. I get it, he said, waving a dismissive hand as if batting away her concern. It's a solid play. Fiscally responsible. And with that, he was off. The dinner table became his stage, the centerpiece of which was his own brilliance. He recounted, in excruciating detail, a recent sales victory at Technova. He tossed around corporate jargon synergy, disruption, leveraging assets like confetti. He spoke of his six-figure salary, not as a fact, but as a weapon. It's about being a shark. You know, he declared, pointing his fork at me for emphasis. You snooze. You lose. I pushed my team to a 40% year-over-year increase. 40%. While some of the old-timers are still trying to figure out how to use Slack, I listened. I sipped my water. I felt the slow, familiar burn of anger begin to kindle in my chest. It wasn't the bragging that got to me. I'd sat in boardrooms with egos that could power a small city. It was the contempt, the casual, cruel dismissal of anyone he deemed lesser than himself. Honestly, the real problem is the dead weight, he continued, lowering his voice as if sharing a state secret. We've got these people. Been there for 20, 30 years. They're like barnacles on the hull of a ship. They slow everything down. A real burden on innovation. As he said the word burden, his eyes met mine across the table. It was a direct hit. He was talking about them, but he was thinking about me. Beneath the starched white linen of the tablecloth, my right hand closed into a fist. I could feel the edges of the fork tines pressing into my palm. I focused on the flame of the candle, watching it dip and sway, a tiny, resilient point of light in the dimness. I felt Laura's goze unme, saw the worry in her eyes, the silent apology. She knew what he was doing. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head, a signal for her to stand down. Let him talk. He was painting his own portrait, and I wanted to see every last brushstroke. This wasn't weakness on my part, it was intelligence gathering. The conversation meandered, but he always steered it back to his own success, his own importance. Then, he touched upon the company's founding craze, a story he clearly saw as a quaint piece of historical trivia. It's actually hilarious when you think about it, he said with a short, barking laugh. Can you believe Technova was started by two guys in a garage? Just tinkering away. They probably just got lucky with their timing. You know, hit the market at the right second. The real talent. Guys like me. We're the ones who are building the empire now. We're taking that little garage project and turning it into a global powerhouse. The anger in my chest was suddenly replaced by a profound, chilling sense of irony. A memory flashed in my mind. So vivid, it was almost a hallucination, the smell of oil and damp concrete, the bitter cold of a Chicago winter seeping through the cracks in the garage door. The exhilarating, heart-stopping moment when our first prototype actually worked. James and I, covered in grease, laughing like madmen. Lucky. He called it lucky. He had no concept of the sleepless nights, the crushing self-doubt, the sheer, bloody-minded perseverance it had taken to build the very platform that now afforded him his shiny suit and his arrogant opinions. The waiter brought our food. My soup was rich and savory, but it might as well have been ash. Derek, after sending his steak back to be cooked a little more, turned his benevolent attention back to me. His expression softened into one of deep, manufactured pity. You know, Michael, he began, his voice taking on the tone of a kindly guidance counselor. I've been thinking, it can't be easy, having all that time on your hands in retirement. My uncle, Frank, great guy. He was lost after he sold his business. You know what he did? Got a part-time job at Home Depot. Greeter. Loves it. Gives him a reason to get out of bed in the morning. He leaned in, his eyes wide with sincerity. It's good to have a purpose. You know, it's not about the money. Obviously, it's about feeling useful. Keeps the mind sharp. That was it. Laura put her fork down with a quiet clink that sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. Derek, that's enough. Dad has hobbies. He has a life. He doesn't need a job at Home Depot. Her voice was dangerously quiet. Whoa. Honey, I'm just trying to help, Derek said, raising his hands in surrender. The picture of innocence. He looked at me as if to say, see what I have to deal with, no shame in it. A man needs to contribute. The rest of the meal was a tense exercise in diplomacy. We talked about the weather. We talked about a movie Laura had seen, but the damage was done. The air was thick with unspoken words. Derek, oblivious, dominated the conversation, until the check arrived. He made a grand spectacle of snatching it from the waiter's hand and slapping down his sleek, black corporate card. We layered up to face the cold outside, as Laura gave me a tight, apologetic hug. I stepped away toward the coat check to give them a moment. Derek's back was to me, and he pulled his phone from his pocket, his voice a low murmur against the sudden rush of cold air as the door opened. Yeah. The dinner was, you know, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The father-in-law is a real piece of work. A broke loser from Evanston. Sweet guy. I guess. But I'll probably have to support him eventually. Just one more thing to add to my plate. He clicked off the phone and turned around. A bright, plastic smile plastered on his face as he saw me approaching with my coat. Ready to go. Michael. I looked at him. I looked at this man my daughter had chosen. This man who lived and breathed in a world I had created from nothing, and who saw me as a charity case. A burden. The simple contentment I'd felt just 2 hours earlier was gone, burned away and replaced by something cold, hard, and immaculately clear. This wasn't just an insult. It was a fundamental misjudgment of character, and it required a correction, a significant one. A leçon, I thought, as I nodded and walked out into the cold Chicago night. A lesson is in order, and his wedding, I decided, would be the perfect classroom. The drive home from the restaurant was a silent one. Laura stared out the passenger window, the vibrant lights of the magnificent mile streaking across her face, painting fleeting patterns on a canvas of deep disappointment. I didn't press her. The words Derek had spoken were like stones dropped into a still pond, and the ripples needed time to settle. When I pulled up to her apartment building, she finally turned to me, her eyes glistening. I'm sorry, Dad. It's not your fault, sweetheart, I said, my voice softer than I intended. You didn't say the words, but I'm marrying the man who did, she whispered, and the pain in that simple statement was a knife to my heart. I told her to get some sleep, that we would talk tomorrow. Sleep, however, did not come for me. I lay in bed for hours. The ceiling of my Evanston home, a blank screen onto which I projected the evening's events. I replayed Derek's words. not with the heat of fresh anger, but with the cold precision of an analyst. Fixed income, dead weight, a burden, broke loser. Each phrase was a data point, contributing to a deeply troubling profile. This wasn't a simple case of youthful arrogance. This was a fundamental flaw in his character, a worldview that measured a man's worth by his wallet and his job title. He wasn't just disrespecting me. He was disrespecting the very concept of a life lived with quiet dignity, a life outside the relentless, noisy pursuit of more. And my daughter, my brilliant, kind-hearted Laura, was about to tie her own life to that flawed worldview. The phone rang late the next morning. It was her. I couldn't sleep. She began, her voice thick with exhaustion. Dad, I am so sorry about last night. What he said was, it was unforgivable. He was showing us who he is. I said calmly, walking over to my kitchen window and looking out at the calm, gray expanse of Lake Michigan. The only unforgivable thing would be to ignore it. There was a long pause on the line, filled with the static of her inner conflict. I talked to him this morning. He said he was just joking, trying to get a rise out of you. He said you were being too sensitive. I felt a muscle in my jaw tighten. The classic defense of a bully: blame the victim for their reaction. And what do you think? Laura. I think. She hesitated, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. I think he's embarrassed. And when he's embarrassed, he get defensive. He doubles down. That's a very insightful way to put it. I said, it's also a very dangerous trait in a partner. I let that sit for a moment before I asked the most important question. Sweetheart, I need you to be honest with me. And more importantly, with yourself. Do you truly love him? The silence that followed was heavier this time. It wasn't the silence of conflict, but of deep, honest contemplation. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I loved the man I thought he was. The charming, ambitious, funny man I fell for. But I'm scared of the man I saw last night. I see him more and more often. Is that enough to build a life on? My heart ached for her. This was the crossroads every parent dreads for their child. No, I said gently. It isn't, but a wedding is in 2 months. People have been invited. Deposits have been paid. Calling it off now would be a massive explosion. So what do I do? She asked, her voice cracking. And that's when the plan, which had been a vague, formless cloud of resolution, began to crystallize. You do nothing. I said, you proceed with the wedding. But you let me handle something. I'm not going to cause a scene. I am not going to ruin your wedding day. I paused, choosing my next words with extreme care. I'm going to give your future husband a gift he will never forget, and one he desperately needs a lesson in humility. Dad, what are you going to do? She asked, a note of alarm in her voice. You need to trust me. Laura, have I ever let you down? No, she said instantly. Then trust me now. I will not hurt you. I will not embarrass you. But I will not, under any circumstances, stand by and watch you marry a man who believes your father is a broke loser without first showing him the true cost of his arrogance. Another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. The battle between her fear and her faith in me. Okay, Dad, she finally said, her voice small but firm. Okay, I trust you. After we hung up, I walked into my home office. It's a quiet room, lined with books on engineering, business, and history. On the wall behind my desk hangs a single framed photograph. It's grainy, black and white, taken over 30 years ago. In it, two young men in their early 20s are grinning maniacally, covered in grease. Holding up a crude circuit board, we were standing in the unheated, two-car garage of my parents' house. That was the first headquarters of Technova. The other young man was James Peterson. We had a shared dream, an insane amount of coffee, and about $1,000 between us. Looking at that photo now, at the raw hope and determination in our eyes, Derek's dismissive words from the night before echoed in my ears. They probably just got lucky. Luck. It felt like a desecration. He hadn't just insulted me. He had insulted that garage. He had insulted the sacrifice, the belief, the very soul of the company that now paid his handsome salary. My resolve hardened from a liquid into steel. This wasn't just about a personal slight anymore. This was about defending a legacy. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. You know, for a retired guy, you keep weird hours. James Peterson's familiar, rumbling voice said by way of greeting, "Retirement is a state of mind." "Jimmy," I replied, "listen, I need a favor." "Name it." "Laura's wedding is in 2 months. I assume you received the invitation." "It's on my calendar. Wouldn't miss it. Looking forward to dancing with your daughter." "Good." I said, "I need you there, not just as a friend, but as the CEO of Technova." I paused, "And I need you to trust my judgment." Implicitly, when I give you a signal, it involves one of your top salesmen, a young man named Derek. There was a moment of silence on James's end. I knew what he was thinking. He was a direct man, not one for games. "Michael, what's going on? Is this kid a problem?" "Let's just say he has a profound lack of perspective," I said carefully, "and I'm arranging a learning opportunity for him. I need your help to deliver the final lecture." I could almost hear the smile in his voice. James always did appreciate my flair for understatement. "All right, Michael, you've never steered me wrong. Not even when we were betting our last $100 on a faulty power converter. I'm in. Just tell me what the signal is." "You'll know it when you see it," I said, and ended the call. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a strange dance of politeness. Derek, seemingly having decided his jokes at the dinner hadn't landed, was on his best behavior around me. It was a shallow, transparent performance. His condescension hadn't vanished. It had just gone into hiding, peeking out in small, telling ways. The most glaring example was at the suit fitting. Derek had insisted on a high-end tailor downtown, a place where the suits started at the price of a decent used car. He preened in front of the three-way mirror, turning this way and that, admiring the sharp cut of his tuxedo. I was being fitted for a simple, classic charcoal gray suit. It was a custom Tom Ford, a quiet statement of quality. But to Derek, it was just a plain, old suit. "Looks good, Michael. Looks good," he said, his eyes flicking over me with a dismissive air. He caught my reflection in the mirror and gave me a conspiratorial wink. "Don't worry," he murmured, leaning closer as if the tailor might overhear. "If the rental fee is too much, I can cover it for you. My treat." I simply smiled. "Thank you for the offer, Derek. But I think I can manage." I added one more piece of data to the file. The man was constitutionally incapable of seeing value that wasn't loudly announced with a price tag. A few days later, I drove to my bank. I didn't go to the main floor, but to the quiet, carpeted section for private clients. I was led into the vault, a world of cold steel and silent tumblers. I unlocked my safe deposit box and slid out the heavy metal container. Inside, nestled in velvet, were several items I rarely looked at. I bypassed my father's watch and my original Technova stock certificates. I was there for a small, leather box. I opened it. Inside lay a pair of platinum cufflinks. They were understated, elegant, and in the center of each was the original, stylized T logo of Technova, inlaid in a sliver of meteorite. James had given them to me on the day we were listed on the NASDAQ, a reminder of our out-of-this-world ambitions from that garage. They were my signal. That evening, I sat in my office and performed the second part of my ritual. I took out my personal checkbook. Not the one from the investment accounts, but the simple one for day-to-day use. I uncapped my favorite fountain pen. The ink, a deep, dark blue, and in my neatest script, I wrote a check to Laura and Derek. The amount was $50,000. It was a generous gift, to be sure, but it was also a carefully chosen number. It was enough to be a life-altering sum to the broke loser he thought I was. It was a test, and it was the final, silent punchline to a joke he didn't even know he was the butt of. I folded it and slid it into a simple, plain white envelope. No fanfare. No fancy card. James called me back about a week before the wedding. "I'm getting my speech ready," he said, "and my curiosity is killing me. Are you going to give me a little more context on this Derek situation?" I leaned back in my chair, looking at the old photo on my wall. "All you need to know, Jimmy, is that sometimes a man's character is best revealed under pressure at the wedding. You won't be acting as my friend. You'll be the instrument of a necessary truth." "A necessary truth," he repeated, chuckling. "You always did have a way with words. Just make sure I don't spill my champagne." The night before the wedding, a strange calm settled over me. Laura was staying at a hotel with her bridesmaids, and the house was quiet. I took my suit out of its garment bag and hung it on the door. It was perfect. The fabric, the cut, the weight of it. It wasn't an armor of aggression, but an armor of authority. The authority of a man who knows exactly who he is and who no longer needs to prove it to anyone. I wasn't a vengeful man preparing for a fight. I was a father, preparing to protect his daughter's future from the biggest threat it faced, the character of the man she was about to marry. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text message from Derek. "Can't wait for tomorrow. Hope you're ready to see what real success looks like. P divided by S. Try not to wear sneakers with your suit." I read the message twice. A slow smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of amusement. It was a smile of grim, absolute satisfaction. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place, and the guest of honor was walking toward it, blind and blissful in his own arrogance. "Oh, son," I thought, placing the phone back down. "You have no idea what you're about to see." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. A brilliant, cloudless Chicago sky that seemed entirely at odds with the storm I was preparing to unleash. There's a surreal quality to the hours before a momentous event. Time seems to stretch and compress. moments of profound clarity, punctuated by a flurry of mundane tasks. I knotted my tie, the silk smooth and cool beneath my fingers. I polished the platinum of my cufflinks until the vintage Technova logo seemed to hum with a light of its own. Every action was deliberate, a small ritual to steady my hand and my resolve. My first sight of Laura that day was when I met her outside the bridal suite. She was a vision in white, a breathtaking embodiment of grace and hope. But beneath the professionally applied makeup, I could see the anxiety in her eyes, the faint tremor in her smile. She knew. She didn't know the specifics. But she knew today was more than just her wedding day. It was a day of reckoning. "Hi, Dad," she whispered, taking my arm. "You look beautiful." "Sweetheart," I said, and the sincerity of it ached in my chest, more beautiful than I could have imagined. Walking her down the aisle was the hardest part. The organ music swelled. The faces of friends and family turned towards us, a sea of beaming smiles. At the end of that long walk, Derek was waiting. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, his face alight with a triumphant, proprietary grin. In that moment, watching him take my daughter's hand, a wave of profound doubt washed over me. Was I about to destroy her happiness, to satisfy my own sense of justice? Was my pride more important than her peace? I looked at Laura, and she squeezed my hand, a silent message of trust that passed between us. And in that moment, my resolve returned, harder than before. I wasn't doing this for my pride. I was doing this for the woman she would be in 10, 20, 30 years. I was doing this to give her marriage a chance to be built on a foundation of truth, not on the shifting sands of arrogance and deceit. The ceremony was beautiful. They exchanged vows, their voices clear and steady. But as I watched Derek slide the ring onto my daughter's finger, I didn't see a devoted husband. I saw a performer playing a role, a man who had aced the interview but was utterly unqualified for the job. The reception was being held in the Gold Coast Ballroom at the Drake Hotel. Stepping into that room was like stepping into another world. The ceiling soared 2 stories high, adorned with ornate chandeliers that dripped crystals like frozen waterfalls. The air was warm, fragrant with the scent of thousands of white roses and expensive perfume. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and the clinking of champagne flutes provided a delicate percussion. For a moment, I allowed myself to simply be the father of the bride, soaking in the opulent joy of the celebration. Then, I saw him. Derek was in his element, the undisputed king of his own court. He stood in the center of a circle of young men, all of them wearing the same shiny suits and confident smirks. I recognized a few of them from Technova's sales division. They were laughing uproariously at something Derek had said, their adulation practically a visible aura around him. He held a glass of champagne, gesturing with it as he spoke, his voice just loud enough to carry over the music. He was performing, and this was his greatest audience. I began to make my way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries, accepting congratulations. I was in no hurry. A good chess player never rushes the endgame. As I got closer, Derek spotted me. A wide, magnanimous grin spread across his face, the smile of a lord greeting a commoner on his estate. He waved me over. "Hey, everyone quiet down." "Quiet down," he announced. Raising his hands, the circle of acolytes fell silent. "Come on over. Michael, let me introduce you to the real engine room of Technova." He draped a heavy arm over my shoulder. The scent of his cologne was overpowering. "Guys, This is my father-in-law, Michael. He's up from Evanston. Been enjoying his retirement. Taking it easy. Michael. These are the guys who are making it all happen. The young men offered polite, dismissive smiles. They saw what Derek wanted them to see, a harmless old man, in a plain suit, a relic from another era. The financially dependent father of the boss's new wife. I simply nodded, maintaining a pleasant, neutrale expression. Before I could be dismissed, however, a small, bird-like woman with a cloud of white hair descended upon me. Michael, there you are. I haven't seen you since the last family reunion. It was my late wife's Aunt Carol. For the next 5 minutes, I was trapped in a conversation about her garden, her grandchildren, and a persistent problem she was having with squirrels. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Derek's circle moving away, heading towards the bar, his attention already elsewhere. The delay was maddening. A small, frustrating obstacle. I answered Carol's questions patiently, but my focus was elsewhere, scanning the vast, gilded room, searching for my partner. And then I saw him. James Peterson was standing near the towering tapper, 5-tiered wedding cake, talking to one of the hotel managers. He looked exactly as he always did, impeccable in a dark suit, his presence radiating a quiet, unshakable authority. Our eyes met across the room. I gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He nodded back. The board was set. Free from Aunt Carol at last, I started towards the other side of the room. And that's when Derek, in his moment of supreme hubris, sealed his own fate. He saw me walking in James's direction and saw an opportunity. It was perfect. A chance to once again show off his proximity to power, while simultaneously reinforcing my lowly status. "Hey, Michael, hold on," he called out, jogging to catch up with me. "Perfect timing. You absolutely have to meet my boss. The big boss. This is the man himself." He steered me by the elbow, his grip surprisingly strong, propelling me towards James. The arrogance rolled off him in waves. He felt untouchable. Today, he was the groom, the star salesman, the man with the world at his feet. We stopped in front of James, the hotel manager, sensing a corporate hierarchy at play. Excused himself with a polite nod. "Mr. Peterson," Derek said, his voice oozing deference. "Having a good time, I'd like to introduce you to someone. This is Michael, Laura's dad." He presented me with a flourish, as if unveiling a mildly interesting but ultimately unimportant museum piece. James turned. His face wore the polite, professional mask he reserved for subordinates. His eyes moved from Derek to me. For a fraction of a second, they held a look of polite inquiry. Then, his gaze dropped slightly, to my cuffs, to the glint of platinum and the vintage logo. The recognition was instantaneous. It was like a switch being flipped. The professional mask vanished, replaced by a wide, brilliant, utterly genuine smile that lit up his entire face. He ignored Derek completely. He stepped forward, bypassing him as if he were a piece of furniture, and pulled me into a firm, brotherly hug. "Michael," his voice boomed, full of warmth and surprise. "Migod. Man, it's been too long. I didn't know you were coming to this thing." Derek froze. His smile faltered, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure confusion. He looked from James's beaming face to my calm one and back again. The confident architecture of his world had just developed a hairline crack. "You You two know each other, he stammered. James released me and clapped me soundly on the shoulder, his hand lingering there. He finally turned his attention to Derek, and the warmth in his face evaporated, replaced by a look of absolute ice. Know him, James said, his voice dropping, becoming quiet but carrying an immense weight that cut through the nearby chatter. Kid. The man you just introduced as Laura's dad, who's enjoying his retirement, is Michael Foster. He paused, letting the name hang in the air for a full second before delivering the killing blow. My partner, the man who co-founded Technova with me in a garage 30 years ago. The color drained from Derek's face. It was not a gradual change. It was as if a plug had been pulled. All life and vibrancy vanishing in an instant, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. The crack in his world had just splintered into 1,000 pieces. No, he whispered, shaking his head slightly. No. That's not possible. There must be a mistake. His eyes darted between us, searching for a sign that this was some elaborate, cruel joke. But James wasn't finished. His eyes were like chips of granite. And what's more, he continued, his voice resonating in the sudden, localized silence that had fallen around our small group. I happened to overhear you at the bar a few minutes ago, telling your friends about the dead weight at the company, complaining about the old founders who just got lucky. He took a step closer to Derek, who involuntarily flinched. That attitude, that profound disrespect for the very foundation you stand on, has no place in our company. Derek. James's voice was now lethally calm. You're fired. The two words hit the air with the force of a physical impact. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, from the circle of colleagues standing nearby, came a sharp gasp, followed by the distinct, shattering sound of a champagne flute hitting the marble floor. The noise broke the spell. Whispers erupted. People turned to stare. The sycophantic smiles on the faces of Derek's colleagues had vanished, replaced by expressions of shock and dawning horror. They began to back away, slowly, deliberately, as if he were suddenly contagious. Derek's entire body seemed to crumble, his shoulders slumped, his confident posture collapsing inward. A sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. His triumphant day, his perfect wedding, his brilliant career, it had all been incinerated in the space of 30 seconds. His wild, desperate eyes finally landed on me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading terror. Please, he choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. Mr. Foster. Michael, you can't. I said nothing. I simply held his gaze, my expression unreadable. My silence was his answer. It was the echo of all the times I had remained silent as he'd insulted and belittled me. But this silence was different. It wasn't passive. It was a verdict. The silence that followed James's two-word death sentence was a physical thing. It pressed in on us, sucking the air from the grand ballroom, making the glittering chandeliers seem cold and distant. In that frozen moment, every eye was on the three of us. They saw James, the executioner, his face a mask of cold authority. They saw me, the ghost, a quiet man whose history had just erupted into the present. And they saw Derek, the condemned, a man who had been a king just a minute before and was now a crumbling ruin. His face, which had been pale with shock, now began to contort with the raw spokteros, ugly agony of utter humiliation. His pleading eyes were locked on mine, searching for a lifeline. "Please," he mouthed again, the sound barely a whisper. "Mr. Foster." James, seeing the exchange, took a step forward, his hand raised slightly, as if to summon security. "I think it's time you left, Derek." It was then that I moved. I raised my own hand, not in a threat, but in a quiet gesture of pause. "James," I said, my voice calm and even, cutting through the thick tension. "Wait." James stopped, his expression questioning but obedient. He trusted me. Every head in that room, every whisper, every shocked glance was now directed at me. I was no longer the invisible father-in-law. I had become the center of gravity. I turned my full attention to Derek, who was trembling, his carefully constructed world having been demolished down to the foundation. "You still don't understand, do you?" I said, my voice not angry, but filled with a profound, almost weary disappointment. "You think this is about me? About my ego? About you insulting me at dinner?" I took a step closer, into his personal space, forcing him to meet my gaze. "This was never about me, Derek. This was about you." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Justice isn't about destroying a man," I continued, my voice resonating in the stillness. "It's about forcing him to see the truth. You didn't respect me because you saw a simple man in a cashmere sweater who ordered soup. You saw a fixed income, a burden, a loser. You assigned me a value based on a superficial and wildly inaccurate assessment. And that is how you see the world." I glanced over at the circle of his now former colleagues, who were watching, rapt with a kind of horrified fascination. "It's why you talk about the senior employees at Technova, the men and women who have dedicated their lives to building that company, as dead weight. You see people not for who they are, but for what you think they are worth to you. The issue was never who I am. The issue, the fatal flaw that just cost you your career, is how you treated someone you perceived as lesser." The truth of the words seemed to land on him, blow by blow. Each point I made stripped away another layer of his defensive arrogance, leaving his core of insecurity and fear exposed to the world. A tear finally broke free and traced a path down his ashen cheek. I then turned to my oldest friend. "James," I said, "don't fire him." A murmur went through the crowd. James himself looked at me, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "Michael," after what he said, after his attitude. "Yes," he affirmed. "Firing him is the easy way out. It lets him become a victim. He'll tell himself he was fired because of a misunderstanding, because of a personal grudge. He'll never learn the lesson." I turned my eyes back to Derek, who was now looking up with a sliver of desperate hope. "Instead, I have a different proposal." I let the silence hang for a moment, making sure I had everyone's complete attention. "I want a sincere apology. Not to me, to this room, to the colleagues you've privately disparaged, and to James, for disrespecting the company he leads." I paused, and then, "I want you to accept a 6-month probationary period. Your title is gone. Your commissions are frozen. You will be reassigned to the Internal Support Division, where you will report directly to Mr. Art Weaver." I saw a flicker of recognition among the Technova employees. Art Weaver was 63 years old, one of our first ever hires. A man Derek had once mockingly referred to as a dinosaur who still uses a fax machine. "For 6 months," I concluded, "you will spend your days helping the very people you called dead weight You will learn their names. You will learn their histories. And you will learn to see the value in experience over ego. At the end of that period, Art and his team will decide if you have a future at our company. It's your choice. Derek, you can walk out that door right now. Unemployed. Or you can walk back into the office on Monday and begin the work of earning back a shred of respect. What will it be? For a long moment, Derek just stood there, his body racked with silent sobs. The magnificent facade he had built around himself had not just cracked, it had been pulverized into dust. And in the wreckage, for the first time, I saw the real man, a scared, insecure young man who had used arrogance as armor. He slowly, unsteadily, got his breathing under control. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He turned first to James. "Mr. Peterson," he choked out. I am so deeply sorry. There is no excuse for my behavior. For my disrespect, I was arrogant. And I was wrong." He then turned to his stunned colleagues. "To all of you, I apologize. I was a fool." Finally, he turned to me. His eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a shame so profound it was painful to witness. "Mr. Foster Michael," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you." And with that, the tension that I had been holding in my own body for months, a tight coil of anger, worry, and resolve, finally, blessedly, released. I felt my shoulders, which I hadn't realized were bunched up to my ears, relax. I took a deep breath, and it felt like the first clean breath I'd taken since that dinner at the Lakeview Grill. It wasn't the feeling of victory. It was the feeling of peace, of a difficult, painful, but necessary task completed. I stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Derek's trembling shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness. Not yet. But it was one of acknowledgement. A start. It was at that moment that Laura, who had been watching from the edge of the crowd with tears streaming down her own face, rushed forward. She didn't go to Derek. She didn't go to me. She threw her arms around both of us, pulling us into a tight, "Disperaci, imbrassi." "It's okay." She sobbed into my suit jacket. "It's going to be okay." As I held my daughter, I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out the simple, plain white envelope. I pressed it into her hand. "This is for you too," I said softly. "Your wedding gift." Later, after the band had cautiously started playing again and the guests had begun to talk amongst themselves in hushed tones, I saw Laura open the envelope. Derek was standing beside her. I watched as he unfolded the check, and his eyes widened, his face going pale all over again. He saw the number $50,000 and then looked up at me from across the room. In his eyes, I saw the final, devastating piece of the puzzle click into place. He finally understood. The money, the status, the shiny suits, it had all been a game he was playing by himself. He had built his entire identity on a currency that, to me, was just paper. The look he gave me was one of dawning, horrified comprehension. It was the look of a man who realized he had been worshipping a false god. The rest of the evening was subdued. The raucous celebration had been replaced by something more thoughtful, more real. Derek did not run and hide. He spent the next hour walking through the room, speaking quietly to his colleagues. One by one, I saw him approach Art Weaver's table and speak to the old man for a long time. His posture deferential, his expression sincere. The lesson had begun. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, Derek approached me one last time. Laura stood by his side, her hand in his. "Michael," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I know it doesn't mean much right now, but thank you for the second chance." "Don't thank me," I replied, looking him squarely in the eye. "Earn it." He nodded, a flicker of his old determination returning. But this time, it was tempered with a newfound humility. "I will." Driving home later that night, the city lights of Chicago, a blur outside my window. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a quiet sense of rightness. Justice had been served, not in the fiery destruction of a man's life, but in the painful, necessary dismantling of his worst instincts. He had been given a chance to rebuild himself into someone better. Whether he would take it was up to him. A marriage, a family, a company. They are all like a house. You can have the most expensive materials and the fanciest design, but if the foundation isn't built on a bedrock of mutual respect, it is doomed to collapse. That night, amidst the wreckage of one man's pride, we had laid the first stone of a new foundation. It was small, and the work ahead was long. But for the first time, it felt real.